Hello, everyone. Welcome to the virtual NCMA Film Club featuring the documentary Through a Lens Darkly, directed by Thomas Allen Harris. My name is Maria Lopez, and I am the manager of film and lecture programs at the North Carolina Museum of Art. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Today's NCMA Film Club is structured a bit differently than previous film clubs, but I hope we can still maintain that intimate environment that we've created throughout the year. Our moderator for the discussion today will provide some background and an overview of the themes in the film and lead the discussion for the first half hour. Then she will be joined by her special guest, the film's director, Thomas Allen Harris. We will also have a short Q&A session towards the end of this conversation. And we want this to be as interactive as possible. So we do encourage you to share your comments, thoughts, or questions out loud with our moderator and special guest. And you can do this by using the raise hand function, and I will allow you to unmute yourself to share. If you don't feel comfortable sharing out loud, you can just enter your questions or comments in the chat. This discussion will be recorded and made available to those who registered but were not able to attend. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the NCMA's Mellon Foundation Assistant Curator, Maya Brooks. Maya's research background is in modern and contemporary art with a focus on the African diaspora and the Black arts movement. Brooks's professional mission is to provide equitable museum experiences for diverse populations. Welcome, Maya.
Hi, everyone. Hello, hello. I am so excited to be here with you all. Thank you so much to Maria for facilitating this event with us. And also thank you to Thomas Allen Harris for being here with me. Later in the event, I'm so excited to be leading today's discussion. As Maria said, I want to preface with this idea that this is a shared space. This is a very open dialogue discussion. And so I want us all to feel comfortable and able to speak and share our thoughts throughout the event. So I'm going to be asking some directed questions that I hope you all feel comfortable answering as you need to. Again, leave your comments in the chat, your questions in the chat, or we can also say them out loud and have a conversation together. So I'm really excited. So a little bit of background about the film before we begin is Through a Lens Darkly, Black Photographers and the Emergence of a People explores the history of Black photography and representation, and how contemporary artists use this material as inspiration in their visual storytelling. So this work was inspired by photo historian and also co-producer Deborah Willis's groundbreaking publication, Reflections in Black, A History of Black Photographers, 1840 to the Present. Through a Lens Darkly is the first documentary to explore the role of photography in shaping the identity, aspirations, and social emergence of African Americans from slavery to present. So I'm hoping you all kind of gathered that from watching the film. And I really want to know you all's thoughts. So our first question is going to be, what was your impression of the film? Did the film leave you with any questions or lingering thoughts? And if so, what were some of those questions or thoughts? So please leave your questions or comments in the chat or raise your hand to share your thoughts with the group. And as I wait for some responses, I'll actually start with my kind of thoughts on the film. So I really loved this film's overview and breadth of Black photography. As someone who studies the Black arts movement, Black photography is such a pivotal part of the Black arts movement for, like the film said, showing this humanity and this realness of what Blackness encompasses. And so I was really, really enamored by the storytelling throughout the film. I really appreciated just the amount of artists featured in the film and them being able to give their personal narratives, and also Thomas Allen Harris's personal narrative throughout the film really enamored me. So just giving my personal thoughts, I really want to hear from you all. So let me know what you were thinking, any questions you had, what were some of your thoughts throughout the film? Was there anything that stuck out to you? Anything that struck you? What kind of emotions were you all feeling while watching the film. Yes, please don't be shy because I'm gonna awkwardly stare in this camera until y'all answer me. No, I'm kidding. I'm definitely gonna wait though. I'm gonna allow you all to feel comfortable enough to say your answers. So just let me know. I'm gonna read them as they come in. So if you don't want me to stare at the camera at you all, no, I'm kidding. So I got a couple answers so far. So Misha said, I love how the film weaves familial storytelling, personal narratives, and situating it all within historical context. That's very true. That was a very beautiful way of presenting this history, presenting these artists. I really appreciated that too. Bill said, I was especially struck by the statement that during Reconstruction, families with few resources saw the importance of having their own portraits taken by professional photographers. Very true, very, very true. I think, you know, we have to understand the socioeconomic background that people were facing, and what, you know, photography meant, what self-imagery meant during these times. I think that's important. Judith said, my reaction was similar to, it was when I read Cast, but the visuals made it much more visceral for an older white woman. My first reaction was that I wanted to share the OINK with key members of my UU fellowship who are sponsoring several awareness, quote unquote, groups to help us understand real history and our white privilege. Okay, very good work. Elizabeth Stone said, the juxtaposition of the family photos with the awful caricatures of stereotypes used for advertisement was quite striking. Yes, definitely, indeed. Just the stark difference between how Black people saw themselves, how the self-image worked in the Black community versus the way that white media portrayed us, white media portrayed our stories, things like that is very striking throughout the film. And so, yeah. Does anybody want to share their comments out loud or anything? Please raise your hand if you would like to share your voice with us. You do not have to be on camera, by the way. You can just speak with your voice and we will be happy. Oh, okay, we have somebody.
Well, I thought it was such a beautiful film, and the photographs, I felt like I should have paused because some of the photographs were so stunning and so emotional that I would have liked to have looked at them for a longer time. And I also appreciated the history in the film. I felt as though that was very powerful. So, my daughter and I watched it together, and it was a moving film.
Yes, thank you so much for your commentary. Thank you. That is very true. Like I found myself, I had to watch it, the film at least 3 times, not only to prepare myself for this event, but to make sure that I caught all the things that were going on. So I definitely appreciate you bringing that up, like pausing, taking time to reflect on the images presented throughout the film. Thank you so much. I'm gonna take one more minute to think about, gonna take one more minute to see if anybody else has any comments or thoughts that they want to share with the group. And then we're gonna move into our next question for everyone. All right, so if no one has any other comments, we're gonna move to thinking about the featured artists throughout the film, which is my favorite part. I love talking about the art throughout this film. It's so great. So I'm actually gonna share my screen with you all so you can see some of the names from the film, just in case you can't recall some of the people that were featured. This is not a comprehensive list. There are so many people with a breadth of artists, and I'm really grateful for that. And so I couldn't include everybody on this slide, but I do wanna at least show you some names in case you need it. So some of the artists featured throughout the film included Anthony Barboza, Carrie Mae Weems, Chester Higgins Jr., Chuck Stewart, Clarissa Sly, Coco Fusco, Deborah Willis, of course, Gordon Parks, James Vanderzee, Renee Cox, Roy DeCarava, and of course, Thomas Allen Harris. So there was a breadth of artists. I will keep reiterating that because there were so many just important, iconic, lovely, beautiful self-taught artists throughout the film, especially those that were thinking about self-portraiture, thinking about how they wanted to translate communal issues, Black communal issues to the public, how they used imagery to think about themselves as artists, think about themselves as Black people, think about community, think about kinship, all of these things. And so I included some image of my favorite artists to start off this part of the discussion. So my question to everybody, and while we think about this, is did anybody's work catch your attention most? If so, who? And have any of you experienced their work? And if so, do you remember when and where? So I'm going to start with a personal story, of course. And so these three are some of my favorite artists / historians. So on the far left, I have Carrie McWeems, whose iconic kitchen table series influenced me a lot in my earlier career while I was thinking about how I wanted to approach Black studies. Carrie McWeems does a great job of showing the multifacetedness of Black identity, especially Black womanhood. And I always appreciated that from her. And so I wanted to emulate that in my study. Deborah Willis is a historian and an artist at the same time, and really influenced my career in understanding how to write about Black art, how to gather Black art and think about Black art critically. And then Roy de Caraval, who is on the far right, is just one of the more pivotal art. Like everybody in the film mentioned this too. Like everybody reads Roy's work. Everybody wanted to be around Roy when he was alive. Like because his work is so seminal to our culture, he was showing Black people in their fullness, in our, in our beauty, in our everyday. And that was something that was unseen for a long time because of the stereotypical portrayals of our culture. And so Roy's work has been super influential about how I think about authenticity. So I want to hear from you all, though. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that we can talk about some of the artists that stuck out to you, if you've ever experienced their work, like in person or in a book. Have you ever seen some of these artists who was new to you? I definitely want to hear from you all in the chat, or if you want to share your voice with us. Hi, thank you. Thank you so much.
I go back a long way, and James Van Der Zee actually took my parents' wedding picture in 1932. So we really treasure that picture. And his work, all the artists were amazing, and they just, as someone mentioned, that you saw the whole scope of African American history there, But James Van Der Zee, I looked at a lot of his work, and he was actually photographing our dreams so much rather than photographing the person, what they wanted to be, what they are, and what they want to be. And it's beautiful.
That is wonderful. Oh my gosh. That's such a beautiful story. And I know you all must treasure that photo. Oh my gosh, that is so amazing. And I like that you mentioned that he photographed based on what you all want, like the guests wanted to emulate. Is that what you said?
Yeah, because he would, in his studio, people would be dressed up, obviously, and he had a background, different backgrounds, and so that person may have been a maid or whatever, but when he photographed them, he photographed what they wanted to be, and it was really beautiful.
That is very beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is wonderful to think about, that he allowed people to be who they wanted to be on camera.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. I got some other comments too. One of them says that my impressions are like those that have been shared. I would like to add that all of the interviewers and photographs that were shared through the time were certainly something. It was difficult to learn that the early photographs were of nude people. I've been reading Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, so to watch this film was certainly complimentary. So will we be able to watch the movie again? Yes, you can certainly watch the movie again, and we can always provide the link to you again if you need it to watch the film. You also said, I think Miss Willis and her work are quite impressive. And they are. I really love Deborah Willis's work. I have a couple of her books, and they're all just very, 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 very just a great start to this understanding of Black photography and Black photography specifically, and how it fits into the photographic art historic canon in America. So I think that you are super correct. And then Misha also said, prior to viewing the film, I was only familiar with Gordon Parks and James Van Der Zee. I too will need to review the film because there is so much to take in. James Van Der Zee's work influenced my love, exploration, and time living in Harlem, New York. Oh my God, that's amazing. I also appreciate the manner in which Van Der Zee's work celebrated the beauty, fashion, and poise. That is a really good point. Fashion in Black photography is something that I really feel like we should talk about. Fashion in Black photography. That's why I'm also glad that you shared that Van Der Zee allowed you to kind of dress how you wanted to dress and kind of allowed you to present yourself, because Black fashion is so important in photography, and understanding how we fashioned ourselves and how it was an expression of self-respect, or how it was an expression of culture, expression of our love, our self-love. Things like that is so pivotal to this work as well, and understanding Black photography. It's not just about the shooting itself or the act of being in studio or being in the streets. It's also the style that people possess in these photographs, the who they are including in these photographs too. So that's very important. And so are there any other comments, any other people wanting to speak their piece? Oh, there's another one. I've had the opportunity to do a workshop with Clarissa at Penland, North Carolina a few years ago. I've also spent time with Deborah Willis when I was in graduate school in 1989. These women have influenced my teaching and my work with students, because I'm much more comfortable as a white woman introducing all of my students to the wonderful views and work of Black photographers and valuing my students' approach and insight. I think that's very true. I think one of the things that the film does so well is showing the value of the intra-communal lens. And I say intra-communal, and what I mean by that is showing Black people portraying Black people, and that love that we give, that care that we give to our subject matter. I think a main point of the film is to show the difference in what the Black lens can do and how it was used to confront photography as an ethnographic study or an anthropological study of Black people. You know, Black photography was used to show that Black people are more than just, you know, subjects. We're artists, we're people, we are community, we are all of these things that matter, and that we are humans and people first. We're not just Black bodies, we're not just Black, you know, subjects, we're not these one-dimensional aspects, we are full-bodied people. And so I definitely appreciate the film for that. So thank you for that comment as well. So the next thing I also, there's another comment, sorry. It is so important to see positive views of all communities and show that we all have brilliance. That is very true. So I'm gonna move, so we are like up almost at our time already. I wanna show you all two pieces from the NCMA collection that were actually, one was in the film, and then one is an artist that we have featured in the collection. So I'm gonna share my screen again so you all can see these two wonderful pieces here at the NCMA and give you this connection that we all have here. So at the NCMA, we actually have a Lorna Simpson work, and we also have a Hank Willis Thomas. So on the left is Lorna Simpson's Vantage Point. This was not in the film, but Lorna Simpson is featured in the film. And Vantage Point, and largely Simpson's work in general, is an allusion to African heritage without declaring it. So she presents these images out of context. Both are disembodied parts of that complete them. The woman's face and the lower body lie outside our view. The mask is detached from the full masquerade ensemble that defines and activates its power. And then she complements this imagery with the back of a person's body. And so the artist suggests this kind of tenuous connection to the continent from which she is separated in time and space. And so this is a great example of Lorna Simpson that we have in our collection. So I was really happy to see that she was featured in the film. And then also this Hank Willis Thomas piece, who was featured in the film heavily, and is also the son of Deborah Willis, is called The Cotton Bowl. And he actually talks about his work a little bit in the film, and he describes this idea of understanding branding, especially as it relates to the Black body. And so the cotton bowl is from the series Strange Fruit, which is a visual and conceptual explanation of the Black body as spectacle and souvenir in the American popular culture. So I just wanted to take a moment to highlight these images with you all before we start to get into some of these other themes of the film. So I'm going to move on to this next slide that we have so that we can talk about some of these themes here. And so these are themes that I picked out of the film. These are themes that I found as I was watching. And I have some larger themes, and then I have some sub themes for you all to consider. So some of the themes that I picked out of the film were memory, identity and community, and then heritage. And then from memory, I thought about accessibility, like literally how do we access knowledge through family photo albums, magazines, museum collections, and then also thinking about accessibility in the terms of like who gets to call themselves a photographer, and this professionalization of photography, which Deborah Willis kind of outlines throughout her work and throughout this film, that there's this idea of the professional Black photographer that comes up throughout time. And there are these different generations of it too, and I would love to talk more about those different generations of it if we have enough time. So then after that, you have this idea of creating a canon. So there's a Black art canon, right? There's this idea that Black art is specifically talking about a subject matter. And images are often created to think about what that Black art canon is. And it touches on concepts such as gender, sexuality, and even age, demonstrating the intersectional identities and generational differences we hold throughout that canon. The next is identity and community, which got me thinking about inclusion and exclusion. And so like, what does community mean to you? Who gets to engage this community and why? And how do we create a sense of belonging in that community? And then the last thing I was thinking about was heritage, right? So this idea of tradition and legacy, photography allows us to capture certain shared practices and experiences that then get passed on to future generations. So one of the things that was mentioned in the film was this idea of who gets to be the keeper of the photographs. And so like for my family, for instance, like it was always like my grandmother has a photo album, her mother had a photo album, my mother has a photo album, and now I am the one that like takes all the photos and keeps all of them in my house. It's very interesting how that kind of happened. It wasn't a conscious thing. It just kind of happened in our family. And then the next kind of bigger idea I had was representation. So again, going back to this idea of respectability and accomplishment and what that means, thinking about stereotypes, thinking about how we were represented in film, and then how we decided to take that back for ourselves, this kind of reclamation of self-image, reclamation of community image. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now so you all can share your thoughts, and if there were any themes you caught in the film, if there's any clarification you need me to give on any of the themes I presented, did you find any sub themes that I didn't catch? What were your thoughts about some of the larger themes in the film? And these things can be anything, like I kind of go into a lot of detail because of how I study the media. But if you all caught anything, like it could be anything from family. There was an emphasis on family throughout the film. There was an emphasis on community throughout the film. What are some of your thoughts about those kind of things too? What stuck out to you throughout the film and kind of connected all the artwork to you all? That's kind of what I mean when I say theme, by the way.
If I can share, I love this documentary, and when I was watching it, it became an educational and emotional journey for me, and it made me think of my family and how important preserving these photographs, preserving, your own family history is. And I remember after watching it, I immediately called my mom and said, hey, where are the photo albums? I need, can you save them for me next time I go back and visit? I want to take them with me. I think another thing that I started thinking about is how now everybody uses their cell phone to take photos, and what does that mean for the preservation of these photographs? Is technology a good thing? Is this a good thing that now all of our photos are stored on Google Drive on our phones? And what does that mean for the medium? So I had a lot of questions throughout, and it made me think about the future of photography. But it also was an educational journey in the sense that, I was really ashamed to admit that I hadn't heard of a lot of the artists that were featured. And right after I watched the documentary, I started going back and looking up the artists and looking at their work, and was just blown away at how talented, how beautiful the photographs are.
Thank you so much, Maria. Yeah, thank you for that. That's very true. There was even some people I didn't, even though I study this for a living, I too was oh gosh, I need to go back and do my work. What is going on? There's so many beautiful people that I had missed. Especially having watched the film the first time, I was oh, let me go back and make sure that I didn't miss anybody. And there were some people that the second time around, I was oh man, I need to really get into their work. So thank you for bringing that up. It was very true. We also have some other comments too. So it seemed as though so many of those interviewed in the movies received cameras as teenagers. Very true, very good observation. Was this a common practice or the impetus of them being photographers and artists? Also, can you tell us about the current status of Black photography? Can you provide us with suggested additional readings and/or watchings? Thank you. Yes, of course. Okay, I will get to some of this additional because I'm running up against my time before Thomas Allen Harris is going to join us. But I definitely have suggestions if you want them. If you need to email me after this event, please do, because I have a lot of readings on my list that will be helpful for you. But also, yeah, I think that is an interesting point about how people got into photography is through this positive affirmation from their family. They were given cameras, they were given, these kind of devices to capture images. I know that's very true of me too. My mom gave me a camera for Christmas one year. And so that kind of support is so helpful. So I wonder if that's the case for everybody. I do wonder that too. I don't know the answer, honestly, about if that had to do with their personal kind of journey through photography. Is it that something that they asked of their families? I'm not sure of every artist, but I wonder that too. And then another person, Judith, also said a comment about one large theme was the contrast of depicting the subjects through white eyes, as defined by Layla Saad and In Me and White Supremacy versus authentic views of Black photographers, through their eyes, which is very, very true and very honest. And so I think that's a running theme throughout this too. Again, is that what we call the intra-communal lens, what we think of as the Black lens. So yeah. Oh, and then another commenter said, my father gave cameras to my two sons and both became visual artists. So again, that familiar support is so important for artists. Being uplifted by your family and being able to say that you are supported in your artistry is a great theme that I've seen throughout the film, and I have heard from other artists throughout the field too, that their dreams were very much supported, and that has helped influence their career path. And so that's a very good comment. I'm glad that that was the case for certain people. So now we're going to get into introducing Mr. Thomas Allen Harris for, sorry, I'm reading Maria's comment to everybody. I'm gonna introduce Thomas Allen Harris so we can get into our next part of the discussion. And I'm gonna ask him some different film questions as well as some general questions. And then we'll open up the floor so you all can ask your questions and give your comments to him directly. So I just wanna show you this small slide I made to introduce him to everyone. And I'm so excited that we have in here with everyone. So Thomas Allen Harris is an interdisciplinary artist and scholar who is the creator and host of the PBS series Family Pictures USA, among other directorial and producing feats. Since 1990, Harris has remixed archives from multiple origins throughout his work, challenging the hierarchy within historical narratives. And he is a wonderful spirit and a wonderful person. So I'm really excited for him to be here. And we are going to allow him to come in as a panelist so that we can start our discussion. Welcome, Thomas.
Hi, Maya.
Hello, how are you doing?
How are you?
Good, how are you doing tonight?
Well, thank you. I've been enjoying the conversation.
Thank you so much. I've been trying to get a lot of what the film is talking about out. So I'm really glad that we have you here to discuss with us all directly. This is so exciting, and I cannot thank you enough. So I'm going to start the discussion with you with this first question about some of the film's background. So knowing that you were inspired by Deborah Willis, specifically her book, Reflections in Black, can you talk about the relationship between that work and the Through a Lens documentary?
Yeah, well, Deborah and I go back to 1986 when Ellis Hazlip, who was the subject of the film Mr. Soul that just came out, introduced us in the archives of the Schomburg. And I was a photographer then in the 80s and before I became a filmmaker, and she put me in my first show. And we developed a very close relationship. And she invited me, let's say fast forward 15, 17 years, she invited me to make a film about her book, Reflections in Black. And of course, I am in Reflections in Black in a collaboration I did with my brother, Lyle Ashton Harris, a photographer, installation artist, whose photographs are heavily featured in the film as well. And so, so for me, it was so exciting, to work with Deborah and Willis, and her work is just so pioneering, and I studied the book, and the challenge that we had as we went into like writing a script around what the film would be, which is different, since the book is chronological, and from the invention of photography to then the modern day, late 90s, how to make a film that is, on the one hand, the first challenge, many challenges with the first one is how to make a film in which you had photographers who were living, who were like throughout the film, as opposed to all the if we made it chronological, all the photographers would be at the end, and you'd have the first 2/3, you'd have all the scholars,
Right.
and so thinking about, well, so it made me think about history, and the way in which the artists of my generation were using the archive as a kind of way to speak about the present moment, and also to recontextualize history. And so I came up with the idea as I was working on a grant to the Warhol Foundation, which very rarely funds films, but I came up with the idea of looking at artists who through their work are recontextualizing the very notion of history by engaging in history. And that allowed me then to bring all these photographers and artists who were contemporary into the 1840s, into the 1850s, 60s, 1900s, and still maintain a kind of general flow, chronological flow into the the present day. And so that was how that was solved, and so that was from the very beginning. And so it allowed me to like kind of use the book and kind of reshuffle things in a way, and kind of like fracture kind of stuff, and as a filmmaker, I am I do these kinds of larger projects that culminate in the film, but a lot of things happen in the process. And so part of the project was creating this transmedia project called Digital Diaspora Family Reunion that helped activate people's family photographic archives. And as it turns out, we did this, it was supposed to be online, which would allow the film to be made accessible to people with their own photographs. And we started shopping it around in 2008, and people started asking me to do a live version of it. And so all of a sudden I was in the roadshow business, going around the country, inviting people to share their photographs with me and tell stories. And out of that process, we actually gained or built an archive of images that had never before been seen in films. And it really helped me understand the value of African-American archiving, home archiving, scrapbooking, saving and preserving our stories. And that also influenced the film heavily.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, I was really intrigued by the balance, like you said, because it wasn't chronological. I was like, how are they going to do this? How are they going to interweave these stories? So it was really nice to also see those contemporary artists comment on the past works, like the generational works that, you know, came from, you know, just these older versions of photography and this kind of start of the Black photography canon. So thank you so much for touching on that. So as you kind of mentioned that there was this process to getting this film started. And so I was wondering, what was the process for deciding which artists to feature? Because there were so many people in the film. There was this breadth and this just depth of people. Like, how did you all decide who to include in the film?
Well, the first set of folks we included, we shot rather, were people who were over like a certain age. And we wanted to make sure, even if we didn't have all the money, we wanted to make sure we did these interviews. And in fact, several folks have since passed. So Hugh Bell, who's featured in the film, he's not actually in the book, Reflections in Black, but he's an amazing photographer. He featured in the film, was a mentor to a lot of photographers. He was also in the MoMA landmark show of Man, Family of Man. And so he since died. Robert Senstack has since passed away. So, you know, so part of this was trying to save a kind of visual record and also visual audio record of these folks who, you know, who were not as celebrated as they should have been, you know. And in fact, the film helped, you know, create even another resonance, you know, building on Deborah Willis's, you know, momentum in terms of opening up space for our celebration of these works and these photographs and these photographers. So I don't know if I answered that question. So we first started with the older photographers. Then we went to the next group of photographers was arranged, and we were still shooting for a trailer because a lot of people, a lot of funders at the time said, well, could an hour and a half film, is there, you know, is there enough work to fill an hour and a half film? And it's like, you know, you were constantly, even though, you know, Deb at that time had 40 books out, plus or minus, we were still butting up against the limitations of ignorance, you know, with regards to, you know, Black photographers. You know, many people at that time could only name one or two, and they were usually Gordon Parks and Roy de Caraval. And, you know, no Black women photographers, even though, you know, there were books, you know, like Jeannie Mutasami Ash's book around the contributions of Black women to photography, you know, going back to the 1840 with her book Viewfinders. And so, so then after we raised the bigger money, we were able to interview do a big interview. And I, you know, I was really, at that time, I knew people who were doing things that either were really focusing on family narratives in their work. There was a big kind of vein, or at least they had a body of work that dealt with that. The archive, and like, you know, Renee Cox, you know, taking, you know, Queen Nanny, you know, archetype in Jamaica, or, you know, Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben, or, you know, or Hank's work around the Black male, and historically, you know, this representation, and, you know, and also Lyle Ashton Harris's work as well, in terms of the way in which he worked with the archive of Vanderzee, and did with his Good Life show. So, not to mention Carrie Mae Weems, who really goes in her work goes from the very beginning of photography to the contemporary in terms of tackling popular culture, the stereotype, family. I mean, she covers her work has such profound depth as many of the other artists in the film. But she also studied anthropology, and so there's a way in which we were able to use people in different ways. Carrie had a lot of commentary. Lyle Ashton Harris had a lot of photographs, and they intersected with our family photographs. Hank had kind of advertising and kind of a little bit of humor and pathos. And so in addition to, other people had these same things as well. So we organized the film in that way. And then we did a last shoot in 2012 because we worked on the project for over 10 years. And we just needed to fill certain things in. I mean, there's so many people I wanted to include in the film, and we may be doing a part 2, who knows? But that's how we had built this group. We had about 26 photographers in the film, and then we had about 26 scholars. And including Coco Fusco she's in the film as a kind of performance artist but scholar as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you touching on the fact that women were definitely excluded in general from the Black arts canon. So I was so just thankful that you included so many women photographers. Like, that really struck me with this film in general. Like, first of all, it being groundbreaking in its own right, but then that aspect too, adding to that. So thank you so much for explaining your process and the way that you all went about including these different artists. The next question, you mentioned your brother, and we mentioned him before too. So like, how did you feel about sharing some of your personal memories throughout the film? Like, did you already have particular stories in mind, or did they come to you as you started creating the film's outline?
Yeah, well, for the last 30 years, I've made these films which are deeply, deeply personal, and several of them I've collaborated with at least one of them I've collaborated with my brother, and then a couple of others he's featured in them, as are some of my other family members. But the films I make, the films I made before this, the Paulding Avenue trilogy, were personal films that mine my family archive to talk about larger social movements, whether it's the LGBTQ movement in the 90s, and also around HIV, or the connection to the diaspora with Amy Akata, That's My Face, which was shot in Brazil and in Tanzania, of three decades and 3 generations of my family, and 12 Disciples of Nelson Mandela, which looks at the anti-apartheid movement through the lens of my late stepfather's photographic album, which I took back to South Africa and used it to get these young South African actors to recreate the narrative that was kept from them because of apartheid. And so with this film, I was thinking I wasn't going to be in the film, but at some point I realized that we needed to actually talk about the psychic cost, that some people referenced earlier, and there needed to be like an honest kind of appraisal of the psychic cost of navigating representation, because images strike us even before we can speak, and we're able to read them. They go right to our core. We understand so much multidimensionality. And so so what does it mean to, what does an image mean? What does it mean to a child to be able to be given the tools to create images, to be able to defend oneself from the ubiquity of the stereotype and the trauma of against perpetrated constantly against the Black body? What does it mean to have images of love? And so I needed someone to do that. and ultimately, it was a dirty job, and someone had to do it. So I had to talk about it. And it occurred to me that, somewhere towards the latter part of the editing process that, my grandfather, whose archive is also in the film, and in fact, my mom was the one who talked about Vandersea earlier, so she's on the line, because my grandfather's was a patron of Black photographers, and he also took thousands of photographs and gave all the grandchildren cameras, actually all the male grandchildren cameras. They asked for cameras, and because they wanted to be like him. And so we had this abundance on the one hand. I mean, that was his hobby. That's how he navigated, family dynamics. Like anytime there was a holiday or whatever, the camera came out, it was a ritual of posing, when we looked our best, and it was a ritual. And on the other hand, my father, who left, our family when I was about 7, didn't take a single image. And so it just occurred to me that the power of the image and what it says, and that the interaction, what happens in front of and behind the camera, what the motivation, what the intent is, and how it's a kind of metaphor for this idea of love, of affirmation, and attention, and so I had to talk about, both that was happening on a micro level, which is something I did. I tried to get other people to do it, but it was, anyway, that was my role in terms of the performance. In terms of the narrative, looking at these two poles and trying to use them to actually see America as a family, where one section, one part, or the dominant part, for so long, could not see, was the myopia and the intentional distortion to allow for a kind of white supremacist narrative to, as James Baldwin says, to be manifest.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that explanation, because it was powerful to see your personal narrative in conjunction with some of the larger narratives throughout the film and how it all tied together. And like you said, this idea of love, this idea of what's lost when we don't take our time to take pictures, to capture our memories, to really think about our connections to each other. So yeah, thank you so much. Before we get into the questions from the audience, I wanted to give you some space and time to talk about some of your other work. And if you have any current projects you're excited and interested in highlighting for everybody to know about. So definitely want to give you that moment.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, I just want to say that, people get the DVD of Through a Lens Darkly or download it and purchase it. You could stop at any time and you could, sit with the image for as long as you want. So, or DVR or whatever. And then you could please find these artists and support them and, look at them and learn from them. So I mentioned the 3 films that came before, the 3 feature-length nonfiction films that came before. Vintage Families of Value, which came out in 1995. It's on Reverie, so you could see that. It's a film that looks at 3 families through the eyes of LGBT siblings. I was motivated to start recording my brother and gave him the camera, and realized that in the process, when you give the camera to a sibling, the power dynamics shift. And so I got 2 other groups of siblings and gave them cameras and invited them on this process to look at each other and talk about familial relationships. And it became a film called Vintage Families of Value that was a culmination of this project over the course of 5 years at the height of the AIDS pandemic, which one of the major motivators behind it, the affirmation that we are valuable and we are, family, and situating LGBT folks in the center of family as opposed to family, or in opposition to family, or and then the next film is Amy Akara, That's My Face. That was shot totally on silent Super 8, but then the sound was created afterwards. I went to Brazil and recorded all these Afro-Brazilian festivals, and came back and found Super 8 that my grandfather and my stepdad had shot, and that became a film. And then I told you about 12 Disciples. I just finished a TV series right before the pandemic, Family Pictures USA, and it's on Amazon Prime, and also broken up in segments in YouTube. It's looking at America through the lens of the family album. So in each of these locations, we got 100 people to come in and share their family photographs, and we told the story of Detroit or Southwest Florida or North Carolina through the family album and people's testimonies. And so I helped empower people to tell their stories and create connection across different. So in each location, we had African Americans, Latinos, Asians, Native Americans, and European Americans. So we're in some ways rewriting the historical narrative, by incorporating these stories and, kind of in some ways, like I did with Through a Lens Darkly, kind of creating a mosaic. And then I'm working on a film that I'm developing right now. I'm working on several projects, but I'm working on a film about my mom and also about my early involvement in science. I did science I went to Bronx High School Science, and I also majored in biology in college, and I was on my way to doing a MD PhD. And before I caught my passion was storytelling, but my mom was a chemistry professor, and so the film is about being raised by a mother who's a scientist, but also my involvement in science and what does it mean. My first film that was commissioned by public TV was called Crisis: Who Will Do Science, and that was in 1989. And so we filmed the reasons why for the low numbers of Black and people of color entering the sciences, and 32 years later, we still have the same issue. And so I'm making a film going back and finding the people who are my mom's students, but also looking at contemporary Black women, primarily Black folks, but primarily Black women, gender non-binary folks who are doing science and how to maintain their culture at the same time.
That's wonderful. Oh my goodness, that is so wonderful. And since you actually mentioned Family Pictures USA, which is a fantastic show that we just dropped the link for in the chat, by the way, for everybody, there's actually a great question from our audience. And someone wants to know, can you please provide us some input regarding the geographic similarities and or differences when we think about photography, when we think about photos? Have you noticed any different patterns as you've been traveling? Because you travel a lot across the states, and just in general, have you noticed any kind of geographical or regional differences with the photography?
Wow, interesting. Well, I mean, so much of it has to do with the land, and the environment. So you will find, let's say, like in Southwest Florida, there was so much documentation of the land as a kind of land and animals as family, and so that was really a big part of it. Florida had cowboys before, I think, Texas, and so it's a cowboy state, but we don't necessarily envision Florida in that way, and so that came through the images. Detroit, it's you have people, it's a more urban narrative, more social, outdoor, not so much outdoors, but outdoors, but there are clubs, so the way in which you have extended family in different kinds of ways, and people with celebrities, and so you have a kind of awareness of Detroit, because it's so African, has so critical in terms of African American cultural production. You have a lot of images of these moments of Black awareness and empowerment, and and a kind of emergence in terms of middle class because of the auto industry and entrepreneurial opportunities that people made. And so those types of differences, so much of it depends on the nature of the location. I can't generalize. I could generalize about specific locations that I have a lot of experience with. And for Through a Lens Darkly, I personally looked at over 25,000 images.
Wow. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
I personally looked, laid my hands and eyes, at least my eyes, and not my hands and eyes, over 25 images, more my eyes, with Family Pictures and Digital Diaspora Family Reunion, the transmedia project that came before that. That was another, I built an archive of over 50,000 images.
Oh my goodness. Wow, thank you so much for that. Yeah, I noticed that too, that there are certain geographical differences in photography based on like just the subject matter for the most part. Like you said, like in Detroit and New York, there's differences in the South even. There's a lot of family emphasis in the South, church imagery in the South too. So that is definitely a wonderful comment. Um, the next question from Bill is, could you please talk about the technique you used when featuring contemporary photographers holding up the work? The palette and focus were especially intriguing. So can you talk some about your choices there artistically?
Yeah, I really wanted to, this generation of photographers, my generation, the generation before me, maybe right after me as well, really were dealing with the chemistry and with the paper and with the emulsion. And so, we're in such a digital moment. And so I really wanted people to actually be holding as objects these images and to interact with them and to, kind of, so much of like the kind of work I do has to do with embodiment. And so I really wanted to actually understand or give a kind of a way for that kind of communication, beyond language. Because, as I said earlier, photography operates, in some ways beyond the verbal language. So that was really important. And that's something I had started to do in terms of a kind of meta narrative with 12 Disciples of Nelson Mandela. I introduced the photographs to communities that had either never seen them or had lost them. And so with this, it was like in some ways reuniting the photographers with their photographs, these images. Everyone came in with images, a selection of images, and going into these stories with them. And we had conversations before, so they worked, they had some idea of what images to choose, and we worked through them as well. And so that was very important. And then we created a kind of studio environment. For me, it was really that was what I was thinking about. So the backgrounds were black, white, and gray in terms of a black and white, thinking about a black and white studio. Many of folks started with black and white. I knew so many of these images, like they were produced, before a certain time, were black and white images, and particularly the artistic, photographs. And so I really wanted to create a kind of a tone and but also texture. And so I in one of my early films I talk about being legally blind in one eye, and so I see double, and and there's different ways that we see. We can't assume that we all see the same, we all look at the same thing and see the same thing. And so so I wanted to actually talk about that through the texture and tones. So I shot on Super 8 and other kinds of formats to actually allow for people to kind of have a relationship with the way in which they were trying to see these images.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm going to check with Maria. I think we're almost at our time, y'all. Oh my goodness, I can't believe it. So fast. It came so fast for us. Maria, do we have time for one more question maybe?
Yeah. Thomas, do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, I can do one more question, and I wanted to just make an announcement to folks. If they wanted to follow me, you could follow me on Instagram, and I'm putting some images up around the new projects I'm working on. And I'm Thomas Allen Harris on Instagram, and then Family Pictures on Instagram is Family Pictures USA on Instagram, and we also have a YouTube channel, Family Pictures USA. And I'll try to put it in the chat later. And I just want to say that Deb has some wonderful new books that are also connected to the film, particularly around the Black Civil War soldier. And that book just came out recently, so I just wanted to just encourage people to find that book. And yeah, and those are the things I wanted to just do a shout out on.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And Thomas, I will also be sharing your social media links, the YouTube page for Family Pictures USA, in a follow-up email to everybody who registered.
Wonderful, wonderful. And we're also, with our project Family Pictures, we're actually starting a new institute. It's called the Family Pictures Institute for Inclusive Storytelling, and we're working with philanthropic spaces, working with organizations to help them change the narrative. Like we did something with the Housing California, where we helped create a family album of housing justice in California, where we had people who, you know, in terms of the people who participated were, you know, formerly homeless, people who were interns, and people who were CEOs and executives, all kind of mixed and created a family album, you know, to really kind of break up this hierarchy.
That's
Which for
wonderful.
me is like, I mean, that's what, isn't that what, oh my goodness, Octavia Butler talks about the fatal flaw of human beings as this hierarchy. So, you know, in some ways that's, you know, that's I feel like that's very much Black Lives Matter, and very much, you know, what my work has been doing over the last few decades.
That was actually going to be my final question to you, was like, how do we continue this idea of the archive? And especially in this digital age, like, how do we, you know, continue to build our archives now that we have things like social media and just digital kind of formatting and things like that. So that was a wonderful piece for you to mention, was that this work is continuing, and it's starting to continue in new ways and exciting ways. And it's still just as collaborative as it's always been in Black photography. Black photography and Black arts in general has always been about collaboration. So it's beautiful for you to say that work is continuing through things like the Family Pictures Institute. I'm very grateful for that. I wanted to thank everybody for being here. I didn't want to go over too much on everybody's time. So thank everybody for being here.
One quick thing.
Yeah.
I think it's so, you know, I teach at Yale. I teach a course called Family Narratives, Cultural Shifts, and also Archive Aesthetics and Community Storytelling and African American Studies and Film and Media Studies. And so what I really try to get people to do is be creative with their archives, you know, because for me, the archive is very much like a language. If you don't use it, then you start to forget its value, its use, you know, and you start to lose elements of it. And so it's like whether you're making like a collage that you hang on your wall, or whether you use it to write a story, or like my mom did in her book, Cold War and Love, which she made out of this story and archive of her grandparents, or many of the people who we touch in terms of our family pictures. We really encourage people to do creative stuff. And that way you are you use the archive, you also create a new purpose for it, for like the next generation. So it's not like you're passing them down hard drives and boxes, but instead, you know, you're giving them something that they have a sense that they can actually use to, for their research, for their creativity, and for, you know, their identity.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm like responding to everybody in the chat. Thank you. But thank you so much, Thomas, for all your just insightful commentary, all of this background on the film. Thank you so much for being here with us. Like, I truly appreciated meeting you and having this conversation and having everybody else join us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I just want to also echo Maya's comments. Thank you everyone for joining us. I know now that things are reopening, people don't want to sit in front of their computers as much anymore. So I really, appreciate you spending your Friday evening with us. And thank you, Maya, for such a fantastic job moderating this discussion, for also providing your insight and knowledge. And a very gracious thank you to you, Thomas, for joining us and sharing this wonderful, wonderful film with us. I like to tell people that I came across it accidentally. I first discovered Family Pictures USA and then discovered the documentary and was completely in love with it. And I cannot recommend the Family Pictures USA enough. I will share the link in the follow-up email, and we'll share his Thomas's social media accounts and the website as well, the Family Pictures USA website and YouTube channel. I just kind of went down this rabbit hole of watching episode after episode, and they're just great and so inspiring. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for supporting this program. I do want to invite you to our next NCMA Film Club, which will be Friday, June 11th at 7 p.m. It's going to be a special edition for our annual fundraising event called Art in Bloom. And we will be discussing a short documentary called Flower Punk about a Japanese botanical artist and a former punk musician. His name is Azuma Makoto. And he creates these breathtaking floral sculptures that have been sent into space and into the ocean. And the panel, we're going to have a panel discussion with a few Art and Bloom floral designers, Onay Cruz Gutierrez, Carol Dowd, and Joseph Barnes. So thank you, everyone. I really hope you can go reserve your free ticket for the NCMA Film Club. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, thank you. Oh, let me put my email in here too.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.